Hello, friends. Welcome back to Amplifying Authenticity, the podcast where we talk honestly about what it means to live, lead, and show up as yourself in a world that doesn't always make that easy. I'm your host, Megan Futrelli, and we sit down with people who are willing to tell the truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Today's guest is someone whose work sits right at the intersection of authenticity, power, and resilience. Casey Tonnelly is the owner and principal coach of Beyond Thinking, where they support people in unlearning the messages that tell them they are too much, not enough, or required to perform in order to belong. Casey's work is rooted in anti-racism, identity, and liberation, and in the belief that imperfection isn't a flaw, it's a strength. They're also the author of the upcoming book, Striving for Anti-Racism, My Imperfect Journey, releasing this March. This conversation is about choosing authenticity even when systems resist it, and what becomes possible when we stop trying to get it right and simply start telling the truth. Casey, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to Amplifying Authenticity.
Thank you so much for having me, Megan. I am elated to be here and talk as much as we can about being authentic and the ways to get there.
Love that. Love that. I would love to start with the idea that feels central to your work, and that's the idea that authenticity actually costs something in systems built on control. So, what does authenticity cost in systems that benefit when people shrink, perform, or doubt themselves?
Great big question to start with. Love that.
Let's dive
Um,
deep end.
yeah. I think one of the things that I think about a lot is, and I've been reflecting on this myself perpetually, but recently, um, is what were the messages I was told about how to be, right? Do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. And one of the things that really came to me was so often I was told more of what not to do than what to do. And that also changed depending on what environment I was in, whether that be school or for me, church or my family or, anything or my dance community. Um, and then like who the authority figure was, right? So like my goodness and my good enoughness ended up being external from myself, right? Like it was never, I never got to decide, did I feel good? Uh, did a behavior feel good? Did a behavior not feel good? I was just kind of told what to do, how to do it, when to do it. And that shifted in the environment based off of who was kind of like holding the space or was the authority figure in that space. And I think that created a ton of anxiety in me. Um, Anxiety and then shame spirals, right? Like I feel like so many of my thoughts made me like overly thinking about every move I made, every word I said, every person I thought about becoming friends with, any work or hobby I was thinking about, maybe trying out or exploring. And so in some ways, like I always view it as like an anxiety tightrope. Being able to fit in society is a very narrow path. And I think it requires many of us to contort ourselves or put masks on in order to be seen as permissible or potentially acceptable. Um, and so in some ways there's a gift that is inherent when you don't fit that mold, right? Is that it can be easier to dissect some of those absorbed messages at various points of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up so many good points there that I just really want to dive into with the idea of shame spirals, because we talk a lot about shame within our work. And when we talk about authenticity, we have to be able to move past that shame and not go into those shame spirals.
Yeah.
I'm curious from your lens, what do shame spirals, kind of sticking to that same mantra of what it's costing society, but what do shame spirals cost us as individuals when we fall into them?
Oof. Well, and I can mostly speak to my own experience and then also the gift of like what I've seen within my community and my relationships. Um, And that I think one of the main things is it causes us to doubt ourselves at every step, right? From like, oh gosh, should I wear these pants or do I need to wear this skirt? Or wait, do I have to wear blue? Am I allowed to wear like an orange color? Like we start questioning every moment of every day because we're consistently trying to fit in. And then the moment that maybe something didn't happen or we didn't get the outcome that we expected, we start questioning of like, oh God, what did I say? Did I do something? Do you think they're mad at me? Oh, they probably are mad at me because then I did that thing that I always do and I said that thing, right? And we just go and we go and we go. And one of my perpetual traps is, I always, when I feel the funk in my body that something is not not just or not considerate to people in this space, I often feel the need to speak up, and that does come with discomfort. Um, and I think about the amount of times that, like, if I've done something like that, and then I might be like, for the person who maybe said something, I might be like, oh God, now they're going to make my life a living heck. Oh gosh, it's going to get so hard. Oh God, now they hate me. Oh, why does everybody hate me? Right? Like I can just really trip down. Um, but also because in my past I experienced houselessness, um, especially when it comes to a working environment uh, and people who hold power within institutions, when I say something that potentially could upset them or make them feel uncomfortable, I'm always like, oh my God, now I'm going to lose my job. Now I'm going to lose my job. And then I'm going to become homeless. I'm going to like lose my home again. Right. And that like, it's very quick that I can kind of jump to the worst case scenario. And I think that is like largely rooted in the shame spirals that were cultivated in me.
Yeah, and your story is unique and not alone, right? And that's so important to identify and to really lean into that. So thank you for sharing because I'm sure that there are many people who are listening who are saying, "Oh my gosh, I've been there. I never was able to put a name on it," right? The idea of a shame spiral, many people just say, "Oh, I'm just hard on myself." But the constant doubt and the constant going down the dark hole is really that shame spiral of feeling bad about what we do. And you talk a lot about, I've had the pleasure of being able to speak with you on multiple occasions. And you've also brought up so many good points around unlearning things that we were taught. And you said that a little bit in that first question as well of, growing up and being younger, and even as adults, we're taught things, we learn things because of society, because of others around us. What has that meant for you with unlearning and having to unlearn so much about what we were taught and what we were told?
And I don't want to like people to, I would never want anyone to be like, oh, but like my parents loved me. Of course they did. I hope. I hope they did. Um, and and yet, right, I feel like we also have to recognize that, like, for myself, like, I was born into two parents who held trauma and were imperfect, right? They didn't necessarily have the opportunities or the space to, like, evaluate or do any healing work, right? So they carried that. And I just always think that we have to offer grace to like prior generations and people who are in our lives that they potentially were doing their best with the tools, the information that they had, but also were largely informed by potentially the trauma they were carrying and the messages they inherited. So I want to have some of that grace there. But I think about how society really, really tells us that, like, if you work hard, you should be able to pull yourself up by bootstraps, right? And uh, that is a myth, right? Like that is a myth. And I don't know anybody who doesn't have to work hard, period. Right. And I think that there's this myth of somehow of like if you grind it out, then you should be achieving, right? And systems in society are not always set up that way. Um, And so for myself, like one of the narratives I used to tell myself was I couldn't spend money. Like I could not spend money, especially once I got into stable housing in like my early 20s, I was like, I have to save every dime I can. And the messaging I gave myself was if I spent money in it like other way other than like food, rent, I was being reckless. I was being financially irresponsible, right? Those two, maybe those are common phrases that other people have absorbed. Um, and I think one of the ways I had to reshift it, like had to rework it, was like, okay, I'm not saying like put all the money in the air. I'm not saying that. I'm saying like my new rule is don't spend more than what you're bringing in,
Mhm.
right? Um, and I think that that is a really different way of existing than like don't spend money. Um, right. And being like, I think the joke um with some of my family members was that I could squeeze a dime out of a penny. Um, and true. But also that like I think that like it really had a cost on me, right? I was like, unless I can volunteer for something, I can't go to it. Unless there's some sort of like I was volunteering for everything, unless I could do a skill trade, like um I'm not doing it, right? Like so I think that like I really was restricting my life, rooted in fear and rooted in these old messages that created various like shame spirals in me. And I think about um my family at various points was cash poor, um, and at various times like lower middle class or middle class, but like it really kind of oscillated between them. And I think one of the things is like that was not about working hard. Like everybody was working hard. And so I think sometimes like this is how like messages can like get created, root in our systems, like in our neurological systems, because it's like it's not just a thought, like physically react to it, like it's in the cells, that's causing that stress, that's causing that shame, that's causing that tension. And I think when you can rewrite some of the rules, um that allow you to be more authentic and allow you to to live more fully, um it's very freeing. um yeah.
How are you able to do that, Casey? Thinking about specifically your money mindset and some of those pieces, how are you able to rewrite some of that narrative?
Ooh, I mean, it wasn't just one thing, right? Like I also didn't gain those insecurities and those shame spirals by, in one way. And so I think like it also took a lot of ways for that to get transformed. One of which was community. I started building community that felt more values based, than just things that were like there. Um, and that was really helpful because when I started building community based on values, that really was a very diverse group of people. And so everybody has different lenses, right? And there's so much that you can share and learn and like support each other in. And so I think that was really helpful because I both met people who had similar maybe experiences or identities to myself as well as people who did not. And there was so much because we were able to talk about those things openly. Um, it was a lot, there was no shame in it. And that was like a confusing experience to then like talk about something and having somebody receive it without any kind of judgment or shame attached to it. I definitely went to a lot of therapy. I mean, like decades.
Do this with you.
uh, and I think also art, right? I think art was like, and creativity and exploration was another thing that allowed me to explore um, some of the various things that I was thinking, feeling, behaviors that were like informed by things. And so I always think that it's like find your recipe, right? Like you just have to find what the ingredients are that work for you, and build your own recipe. For me, it was art, it was community, it was expression, um, and therapy. A lot of
Yeah.
therapy.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing. As you were speaking, I was thinking about some of the, and this might be some of the work that you resonate with as well, but thinking about white supremacy culture, right? And thinking about the idea of perfectionism and the stories that were told of society of what we should be, right? And that shame spiral of perfectionism. And I know that I struggled with that for a very long time. That's something I still to this day, I'm very linear. I'm very logistics based. I like everything to go a certain way. And when it doesn't, because it's not if it doesn't, it's when it doesn't, I do have to really recenter myself. And I'm wondering if you struggled with any of that perfectionism component as well, because of some of the things you shared of what society said you should do or shouldn't do. And how has that resonated with you or with your work?
Well, I think, the thing that's always interesting to me is like I look at like what are like the elements of white supremacy culture that I struggle with the most. And I would say perfectionism and a sense of urgency, right? Which great
Mm.
combination. Um, and I think one of the things that I always like, I literally had a note up on my wall for years that was like, it is not your job to respond to other people's urgency. Because I
Yeah,
know.
can you send it to me? Like, when
I'd have
people
to make it
email
again.
me at 1:59 and say I need something at 2 o'clock, is it my responsibility to get it to them?
Woo. And I think like again depends on the relationship, depends on the dynamic, but I think that, one thing because it's never just like one thing, right? But like I think one thing that was helpful for me was learning how to communicate too, of like, I for a long time I was working for somebody who was like, I need this, like this need. I was like, it's not food. It's not sustenance. Like, do you need it or do you want it? Because those are really different things. Um, and so, I think one of the things that I started being really clear on is like, if you want a polished version of something, I have to have 48 hours notice. And if I don't have 48 hours notice, I cannot give you something polished. I now write that into contracts, right? Like, um, and which is a gift of being self-employed, right? But I think that there is something a little bit of like, it's a PowerPoint. If you don't have it at 2, I think things are going to be all right. And so I think part of that was shifting that for myself. Part of that was like communicating, like both like my needs, wants, and expectations. Um, and I want to say very clearly that there was a time somebody was like, "What do you want?" And I was like, I couldn't think. I was like, "What do you mean? What do I want?" Like, I didn't even know how to answer it, right? I didn't know how to answer what I wanted or what I needed. Um, until I like really took a good sit down with myself to really kind of figure out like what are the things I need and what are the things I want. Um, and that took time, right? And it evolves, of course. But I think one of the things that can be really helpful, another thing that might be a little woo for folks, but is taking deep breaths. I think deep breaths like help to reset your nervous system, right? So that your amygdala isn't getting entirely hijacked, where you're like jumping into that response mode or fight or flight or fawn. Um, and I think one of the things that people get really stressed out when like you critique perfectionism, um, because we've been so conditioned for it, and I always say, like, oh, no, 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 I rewrote that. Like, I'm never aiming for perfection. Maybe sometimes I get perfection, and that's wonderful, but I am always striving for excellence. Always. And that's really like different, right? Because if I'm striving for excellence, that means there's room for mistakes. That means there's room for learning. That means there's room for adapting. That means that there's like a continuous improvement process that can be cultivated in there. And so I think that there's always like, when people hear like perfection's not real, you like I in a room you can feel the chests tightening when that happens. And there's a little bit of like no one's saying like get into your jams and just sit and like take a nap. Like no nobody if you do that that's great. But like nobody's saying that. Like, and I think that that's people's like automatic switch to. And the reframe to that and the rewriting of that rule, I think, is that piece around strive for excellence, surprise yourself, right? Because maybe you even come up with something totally different. But also, like with that, there is room for error, there is room for feedback, there is room for reimagining, and that it's just instead of perfection, which feels like such a narrow linear line that one has to walk. I feel like striving for excellence, like just like it creates more of a landscape, right, where you get to like explore um the path that you want to take. And urgency, I think, like, I feel like I was raised and grown to kind of be like, if a request was made of me, to do it immediately, to always do it immediately, to always meet other people's needs or expectations in the moment. And then, when you're like, wait, but this parent asked for one thing, this parent asked for another thing, my teacher asked for this thing, which contradicts with what the principal asked us to do. But then for me, it was a priest. But then my priest is telling me X. Like, if they're all priorities, none of them are priorities, right? I can't do any of them. Um, and so I think that like getting really clear of like what is urgent. And I think, I've been fortunate in many of my work experiences that I worked in emergency management for a while. And, one of the things is like, there are times when things are life and death, um, but most of the time they're not. Um, and so, like, and most of the time in preparedness world, like, we're in getting prepared and recovery, right? And then planning again. That's the majority of the space. Um, the actual, like, emergency response is a much smaller window, right? And so I always think that it's really helpful to question urgency. Um, how real is that? And, and some people, I'm sure some listeners are like, oh, my boss requires that. My boss means like if they email me, they expect a response in 15 minutes. Um, and I get that. And I think, sometimes there's like, some questions you have to ask, and maybe it's not as much of a pendulum swing as no. But maybe it's a little bit of like, what would it look like if I actually waited a minute or five before raising my hand to take on a task or to respond to something. Um, because I think that's a lot of times when I'm coaching people who are like experiencing burnout, I'm like, do less. And they don't know what that means, right? Of course. But oftentimes it's a little bit of like, well, these are often people who are like trying to be a team player, trying to do a good job, want to be seen as a good worker and a good employee.
Yeah.
And so they take on like housekeeping tasks, or they take on extra work, and then they're overloaded. So it can be as simple as just like taking a beat before signing up for the next thing.
Right. And going back to the idea of perfectionism, I love that your book that's coming out actually calls it to the surface right away and says, my journey was imperfect, right? Can you share a little bit more about why it was important for you to really center in on your own imperfection in this work?
Yeah. And I think that like it's an active thing. I am presently imperfect. I will continue to be imperfect, right? There's no past tense on that. Um, I think, one of the things that kind of excites me, frankly, um, is that if I don't know who I'm becoming yet, right, there's a lot to explore. There's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of openness to like who knows what, versus of like if I have it in my mind of like, nope, I'm going to bust my butt, I'm going to put in the extra hours, I'm going to take on the extra tasks, I'm going to grind, 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 and then I'll like get the promotion and my life will be amazing, right? Like I think sometimes we kind of have that thought process, um, and one thing that's been such a gift was that release of perfection, right? And like moving towards striving for excellence. And I think we are human beings. We are human beings. Nobody is perfect. Uh, And anybody that says they are, run. They're dangerous. They're not well. It's like,
Yes.
it's not good. Get away from that. Like, we're human beings. We're going to make mistakes. The thing is, like, how do we respond to that? Do we get defensive? Do we get defensive and shut down and then come up with all the reasons why somebody else is a jerk? Or like did a thing or how they're wrong or whatever? Or are we like curious about it of like, wait, what did I do? Uh, what was that? Where'd that come from? How'd that happen? Right. And then making a meaningful amends. Right. I think I grew up Catholic, and so I was actually very used to instant like absolution, right? Of like, if I just told God I was sorry, it was good. Uh, so I didn't actually need
Your
anybody else.
penance and move on. Yeah.
Do my penance and move on. And I feel like in real world, in real relationships, that is not good enough. Um, and and just moving to like instead of having shame about it, right? Because for me, it was like, oh God, I made a mistake. Now God's mad at me, so I'm probably going to go to hell. Um, Not great, not a great scenario. Um, but I think that like there's this piece of like, if I know that I've made a mistake, and that could be like, oh shoot, I missed a typo in a paper and I'm sending it off. I might just follow up and be like, hey, I was looking through that again and I noticed there's a typo. Do you mind if I fix it first before you read it? Right? Like, or if I hurt somebody, if somebody is like, ouch, I didn't like what you just said. Um, Again, depending on what it is, some people don't like, the word white supremacy culture. Sorry. But I think that like if I know that like I have two collaborators who I work with who I always know when they're going to give me feedback. Um, and one of them always approaches me and it's like, "Hey friend." And I'm like, "Oh, get my listening ears on here. Something's coming my way." Or I have another collaborator who is like, "Casey, Casey, Casey, Casey." And I know when that happens that I'm like, oh, I might have done something that wasn't great. Sometimes it's really small, sometimes it's bigger stuff. Um, and I think that like it is when you get into the practice of having feedback as like a constant thing in your life, it's not hard. And it doesn't have to be that hard. Um, and again, I think getting feedback and getting feedback on a regular basis doesn't mean that people are like, Casey, you were doing everything wrong. We don't like anything about you. It isn't that, right? It might be something as small as like one of my collaborators was like, "Hey, I told you I was going to say this thing, and I knew it was going to get a reaction, and you were supposed to say something, and you didn't." Right? And I'm like, "Oh shoot, that's when the projector stopped working." Right? And so I can be like, oh, I failed. Like, oh, next time I'm going to let the projector fail. I'm just going to let that go. Um, right. Because again, I think that probably in that moment, something like that, like it was like I wanted to fix the current issue. And instead I missed the point. Um, and so I think that there is something about when you can get comfortable kind of receiving feedback just as like a conversation piece. Um, it doesn't have to feel as heavy and it can be a little easier. My partner and I do check-ins pretty frequently. And I asked her recently, I was like, what's one thing I do that really annoys you? Uh,
I don't know
and
who asked that question right now.
Well, and I feel like I definitely received a look that was like, "Are you serious right now?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah,
To me. Yeah,
uh,
it's to me.
give it to me." And like, we have broken up our household whole duties and things like that. And I think we have different tolerances for the level that trash should get to. Um, and so I'm like, the bag has more space in it. We should fill it like that. We should fill it to the brim. Again, dime out of a penny. Uh, and she's like, it's full. It's full in the can. Take it. Um, but when she was giving me the feedback, she was like, we both see it. And I just started laughing, right? I was like, oh my God, that's hilarious. And now like we both see it is like a phrase we use in our relationship for like so many different things. Like we might just like see something out in the world and we're like, we both see it. We both see it. Um, and so I think that there's like part of it for me has always been like, I want to be more playful, right? Like whether I'm striving for excellence, whether I'm trying to exist in this world, like I want to operate with a sense of humility and be playful. And I think that's just like a small example of how that looks. I know for a lot of people, they're like, oh my God, I don't even want to know what the answer is. Uh, uh, and and don't worry, I did give my partner an example as well. And like again, it's something that we laugh about. And I think that like there's something really liberating about not having to take things so personally, right? Because like being like we both see it, um, it is not a critique of who I am. Right. And I think sometimes it's sort of like if somebody's giving us feedback, we think that like they don't like us, we're bad, we're not good, we're not good enough. Um, and that's not true. Um, right. Like those things are not like you are good enough. You are valuable. You are deserving because you exist. Right. Like because you exist, those things are true. And I think it is really a challenge to push past I mean, our insecurities get created for a reason. Not all of it is like societal messages. So, like, a fair amount for me was, but like, our insecurities get created for a reason. And I think somehow when we can like work through them and we can like transform some of those thoughts, um, it can be really empowering. And when you're feeling more empowered, you're accepting yourself more. There's more self-acceptance. And when you have more self-acceptance, it's easier to receive feedback. And so like they all connect to each other. Um, and and I think like the reality is like when I was living inauthentically, which I think like, I did all the things. I like worked really hard. I went to school, I blah 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 blah, got the good job. I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
Uh I wasn't happy. And then it was hard for me to like actually attract the energy I wanted, right? Um, and I think the more I started to like put my tippy toe in exploration of like, well, what if I just tried going to this, there was this dance that I started going to that ended up being very good for me. But like, I went to this dance, it was every Friday, it was in a very unique environment. Uh, And I was scared. I was really scared to go. And I was like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Like all everybody who goes there is considered othered. I don't want to go. And then I went. And I was like, not right away, but like being in the environment and being around people who were more comfortable in their own skin and being around people who could also see my terror, right? And some avoided me and many operated with kindness. Um, and I think that that was such a like shock to my system that it took time to do that, and then it allowed me to kind of explore a little bit more. um for me at the time, I grew up dancing, and I assumed that if I went into partner dancing that I was going to have to be a follow, because I was socialized female and I'm quite petite. Um and I get into this space and they're like, do you want to lead or do you want to follow? And I was like, what?
You're like, there's
Just
a
the question,
choice.
the
Right.
choice of that. I was like, what? And then I learned how to lead. Um, and then I was like, I was pretty good. And then people wanted to dance with me. And I was like, what's happening right now? And so like it was just like such a small but huge
Right.
thing of like, and I didn't give myself that permission slip. Like it was kind of presented to me.
Yeah.
But it started to provide that moment of like, well, what is it? What kind of permission slips do I need to give myself so that I can kind of explore what more of my authenticity looks like?
I love that. And we ask a couple questions to all of our guests, and that was actually one of them of share a story. And I think that just fits so beautifully around a story of leaning into authenticity and what that means, right? And one of the takeaways I take from that is giving ourselves that permission slip sometimes. So powerful. Casey, you've talked a little bit about the work you do. We've talked briefly about your book, but I'd love to give the audience a little bit more of an opportunity to learn a bit more about what you do. And I'd love to hear within that your why. Why do you do what you do?
Ooh, well, a few things. I stumbled into anti-racism work about 20 years ago. I really was like on the pathway of like, I'm a good person. I follow the rules. I do what society tells me. I'm contributing. I'm a good person. Um, and then I was working in emergency management, doing outreach, and working in community. But emergency management fell under the police department. And I got a call from headquarters that was like, you're a trainer. You work with different people. You're going to go train our officers in anti profiling. Uh, I panicked and I didn't want to do it, which was like the first moment I think I probably like reflecting, I can look and be like, oh, I was avoiding, right? And I was avoiding for a lot of reasons. Um, I eventually got a great call out from somebody who became my mentor. Um, and she was like, have you ever complained about policing? Which I had because, especially at the time, there had been many, many stories being reported all across the country of like officers pressuring um, female bodied people being like, do this for me, or I give you a ticket, or I arrest you. So, yes, I had a problem. Uh, and so she was like, people have been banging on this door for hundreds of years, and you just got an open invitation. Are you really not going to take it? And so that was like my first like call out of kind of like walk your talk. Uh, and
Mm.
so that was a very illuminating experience. I ended up doing that for 3 years. Um, and so I kind of stumbled into it. And I think I just jumped into the deep end. So once I was in the deep end, I was like, I need to learn how to swim. Uh, and that changed my life, right? It changed my life and it changed my perspective on almost everything. Um, And I think so now what I've been doing since then has been engaging in various anti-racism work, whether that be facilitated conversations, whether that be small group discussions, whether that be training, whether that be policy review, so forth and so on. Now, what I primarily focus on is I work with white folks who are wanting to excavate their racism, right? Like they know it exists, they're not fighting it, they're not, but they struggle to know where it is within them, um, or how that shows up. And so I try to provide like a really safe um, as comfortable as can be, um, supportive environment, right? It's not always comfortable. I fully admit my clients will tell you that too. Um, but I like to feel like I'm kind of like how my dance partners refer to me. I'm like a gentle lead, right? Like you can feel the guidance, but there's not like clunky, abrasive, turns coming. Um, yeah. And my why is, you know, I had a really well, it's multifold, right? I had a really abusive household growing up, and nobody believed me when I was saying what was going on. And I lost my family. I had to move, and at the same time, I had a parent who was very violent and very unwell, who was stalking me, who had me beat up, who was taking loans out in my name, like all sorts of stuff. And I ended up having to go to court. And I was at court and I was seeing all of these women and many women of color talking about, with bruises on them, talking about, uh, being like, this person hit me. they hit me, and not getting an order, like not getting any protection options. Um, and I was able to get one. And it was both like liberating and devastating at the same time, right? And I think that one of the things I think about is like, what if society is the abuser? What if society is the abuser? Because it's causing a lot of harm. It's causing a lot of harm. Um, and I think we ask a lot of the wrong questions, right? We're always like, what are people going to do about crime? What are they going to do about homelessness? And I'm like, why aren't we asking the questions? How did people become unhoused? Why are people committing crime? People who are resourced and cared for tend to not commit crime. Um, and so I think that like that's a piece of I see it in the work that I do in life. Like I see um, that the system is rigged. And it's rigged to benefit some, and it doesn't even benefit that demographic that much. Uh, and it really harms others. And so I think that like ever since I got my restraining order, uh, I was real committed to being like, mm-mm, mm-mm. Uh, everybody, everybody should have the opportunity to feel seen, heard, valued, cherished, even. Um, and there's richness in people's stories. Just because they're not our own doesn't mean they aren't relatable, brilliant, essential. And so I think my why is a little multifaceted, but yeah, I think that like my commitment feels steadfast.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Casey. If there was one thing that our listeners could do as a result of listening to this conversation, what would you invite them to consider?
Oh, just one thing. Um, ooh, I think that take some time for reflection. I mean, it's something like we really deserve and we don't give ourselves space for. A reflection of like, what are the thoughts in your head, the things that are telling you you should? What are the should holes? Where did that come from? And is there a more empowering way to reframe it?
Yeah.
Give yourself that gift.
Love that. So, taking the time to reflect and also eliminating some of the shame behind it, those shoulds, right? Because should is really rooted in shame, but also thinking about where did it come from? Where did it stem from? Because it's not until we identify the core of what we're experiencing that we're able to really root that out, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And just as a little bonus piece, if you can do it while also having non-judgment, uh, it's really helpful, right? Because it's like I absorbed messages from somebody who I felt really loved by. They actually like they were one of the few people I felt loved by in my youth. Uh, and they also embedded me with certain messages, right? And so both of those things get to be true. And so like have grace both for yourself and for potentially where those things come from. Um, yeah.
Have grace for not just yourself, but for others, and to try to suspend judgment, not just for others, but also for yourself. It's a two-way street, right? Love that.
Mhm.
Casey, I want to thank you so much for your honesty, your clarity, and your willingness to name what so many people feel, but don't always have language for. You brought in some really great components and some sound bites that I wrote down as well. I just really appreciate your authenticity in this conversation. For those listening, you can learn more about Casey's work at beyondthinkingwithcasey.com. Connect with them on LinkedIn and sign up for their email to stay connected. They have an email list. They will also be providing a free resource for everyone listening. Casey, would you like to tell them a little bit about that resource?
Yeah, and I'm so excited that I already mentioned reflection. But I created a free downloadable journal, which really does focus on like diversity, equity, and inclusion because it helps to kind of excavate some messages uh, that we've learned. But again, I think that when we're talking about, you know, same way that like systems of oppression have been created is similar to the way that shame holes get created. And so um, I'll share the journal. It's free, it's downloadable, it's pretty diverse, and you are welcome to pick and choose what works for you.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Casey. Thank you for everyone listening. I cannot say how much I've enjoyed this conversation. We are in our second season, and every single conversation, I just feel so blessed and honored to be able to be in the presence of so many authentic people. And Casey, you are one of those amazing people. So thank you. If this episode reminded you that you don't have to be perfect to be powerful, that you can strive for excellence instead of perfectionism, I hope you can carry that truth forward. I'm Megan Fucciarelli, and until next time, keep telling the truth to yourself and others, keep trusting yourself, and amplifying authenticity.